associate professor at the College of Public Health at Iowa, and heads up their Center on Aging. So they were one of the sponsors for all of this. It's interesting, Brian's had quite a career in both dementia policy and mental health policy and aging from this work here. And then two of our master's level grants were there. One guy from the guy actually that did the marijuana presentation, talked about alcohol a lot too, actually, and a few of the other drugs. But Mitch Magnus is a grad of our online master's program, heads up the aging and mental health programs at the state level in Oklahoma. Lest anybody get nervous, he was already in Oklahoma before he got there. If you get a master's, you can end up in Oklahoma. Not that that's a bad thing. And then Alexandra Cruz, who's a graduate of the on-campus MSD program, has a similar position in state government in Florida. He's kind of moved around in different positions with Medi-Cal billing and long-term care, and whatnot. He's now doing aging and mental health stuff. It's always fun to see you guys after you grow up. The leaves on the trees are changing. Des Moines was a lot smaller than I thought it was. It's been a lot because I've been in the Midwest, but it's kind of small. So I played hooky on Tuesday morning and went for a walk because other than that, I'd only been like out in the cover of darkness to go to dinner the night before. I haven't been out of the hotel in 2 days. And it's like walking around, business at 10:30, 11 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday morning. And the hotel's located like between the City Hall and the State Capitol building, just a couple of blocks from downtown business court. There's like nobody on the streets. No car traffic, no people. So we talk about emotion and aging, and what we think we know about it up to this point, and how it relates to some other issues of maturation. And one of the big issues that people, probably mostly unintentionally, I mean, people obviously study emotion and think about emotion theory, think about this in more depth, but I think a lot of people kind of looking at things about emotion and life satisfaction sort of come to decisions about this without actually even realizing that they're making a decision. One notion of how emotion looks, and I think that underlies a lot of not so much psychology in aging, but like social gerontology around concepts like well-being and life satisfaction and happiness and sadness and sometimes depression, as that people have kind of a notion that it's a one dimension that goes from being sad to being happy. And so like if you're not happy, you're sad. If you want to measure sadness, you could have items that ask about happiness and count those scores on happiness as counting towards sadness and so forth. Another, and this comes out of some kind of factor analytic tradition that we talked about with regard to intelligence and personality. People have applied that to trying to understand the structure of emotion. And another concept that I think people mostly find kind of less intuitive, but fits the data pretty well, is that actually happiness and sadness may be more or less independent of latent variables. And so you could actually be simultaneously happy and sad. Some of you are old enough probably to have that experience. You could be neither, or more traditionally, you could be high on one and low on the other. That's probably the way we mostly think of things as going. This is, in social psych, one of the things that this has led people to be very cautious about combining oppositely worded questions in the same scale, or to think that happiness is the opposite of, low scores on happiness means that you're sad, or low scores on sadness means that you're happy, which is something you see all the time in the gerontology literature. And I can't count the number of articles I've seen over the years where people say they're studying well-being, and the way that they're studying well-being is they're using the CSD, which is the depression measure, and they're counting low scores on the CSD as well-being. So you're not depressed. You're happy. Or vice versa, that people will have like a life satisfaction measure and then count low scores on life satisfaction as it is with depression. Increasingly turns out that if you have scales that are intended to measure a construct, just about any construct actually, and you're mixing positively and negatively worded items, when you factor analyze those, the negative items load on one factor, the positive items load on another factor. So you have measures that sort of an underlying independence to, or at least loosely coupled constructs there. But, it's not complicated enough yet, so here's another one. Another way of having a two-dimensional factor structure of emotion is arousal on one dimension and our old friend, the sad, the happy valence on the other. And, this particularly comes into play in the things that you see in psychology literature and psych and aging kind of literature to the extent, particularly as people get into neuroscience kinds of issues. Whether people say emotion when they mean high arousal, and whether they identify high arousal activation as a particular kind of emotion or as emotionality more generally.
I'm sorry, I'm not understanding. So whether they say high arousal, whether that's an emotion in itself or an aspect of an emotion, is that what you're saying?
Usually, it can go any of those. In some cases, people will identify either psychophysiological states or activation of brain centers, especially the amygdala.
You could be like angry or,
Well, high arousal emotions would include anger, anxiety, fear, some kinds of elated happiness can be high arousal. And see, one of the questions that do you think of erotic longing as an emotion, or as being something more like hunger? Nobody wants to fight.
Could you make hunger into an emotion?
It's been so long. I don't remember.
We're sorry. We're not talking about actual activity. I mean,
Just in general.
What would separate hunger from emotion, though?
Yeah.
I would put it more as like a drive, right? I think that it's not necessarily. There's crossover, and there are emotions that are experienced that are unique to having, say, like an erotic drive, what I'm calling it. But I think the underlying, that it's more of like a drive than just an emotion that's pulling you.
What was the other thing you said? Is it an emotion or is it what? Like that?
Well, more, as Jeff would say, like a drive, or something more like a physical state, more like hunger. Or,
Oh.
I think it's kind of both, and they influence each other. Like, high emotion might increase, like, actual arousal. I don't know. But I think they can kind of be independent, but
Could be state specific, too. Could be random, or I could definitely see it being related. I'm going to say both. I can comfortably sit with that one.
yeah.
When you say high and low arousal, how do you put like positive arousal and negative arousal?